I am excited to introduce the topic today. So welcome everyone. Maddy Martin here for Smith.ai. I am the head of growth and education for Smith.ai. We're a virtual receptionist and web chat service using North American-based agents and our AI technology to answer calls, chats, texts, Facebook messages now, and we do a lot more than just answering. We do lead screening, scheduling, intake, callbacks to web form leads, you name it. We have very robust CRM integration. So we'll talk today with Neil, our guest, about practice management solutions, and we integrate with those as well as your calendar and other tools that we will for sure touch on. So really excited to introduce Neil today. Neil Tyra is the owner and founder of the Tyra Law Firm, and he is based in Maryland. Is that right?
That's correct.
And Neil, tell us a little bit about yourself. Welcome to our Master Series.
Well, thank you, Maddy, for having me. As Maddy indicated, my name is Neil Tyra. I'm an estate planning attorney, reformed litigator in Rockville, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. If you've been watching the news lately, we are just a stone's throw away from Walter Reed Army Medical Center. So that kind of puts you in our geographic location. I am, as I said, an attorney, but law is my fourth career. I like to say to people, I can't decide what I want to be when I grow up. So I started off early in life cooking for a living. I cooked all over the city of Annapolis, if you're familiar with that area, Annapolis, Maryland. And then I went to work building hardware and software systems for the government, primarily for NASA and the DoD. I worked in the space program and satellite programs. Spent 20 plus years doing that, developing software in the end for air defense systems, the Icelandic air defense system and the Jordanian air defense system. And all that time, I was a practicing martial artist. So when it came time to leave Computer Science Corporation, one of my black belts said, why don't we just open up a commercial martial arts studio, which is what we did. So we opened up the Kenshin Karate School, and I owned and operated that business for about 12 years. And but in the back of my brain, I was always plagued by the idea that I wanted to go to law school. And I had a couple of friends who went to law school later in life, and they were kind of my role models in that sense. And so I looked around. I have two lovely children who were, if you did the math, we're going to be going to college pretty shortly thereafter. And I needed to get in front of them before the money ran out. And so I applied. I didn't even know what law school was all about. So well, let me just see if I can get in. That's the first thing, because it had been 12 years since I left the University of Maryland. By the way, I was on the 12-year program at the University of Maryland. It took me 12 years to get my degree because I took one class at a time, essentially. But I let my employers pay for it at the time. But then I was out of school for 12 years before I went back to law school, and I was lucky enough to get admitted to the Catholic University Law School, Columbus School of Law. And I went there, graduated in 2004, and thought I was going to put bad guys in jail, thought I was going to work in the prosecutor's office. Instead, I went to work for a small boutique law firm in downtown Washington, D.C. that did personal injury law, litigated personal injury cases. I stayed there for about 3 years. And then my son, who was a pretty prolific athlete at the time, was going into high school. I knew he had a chance to start as a member of the varsity soccer team, and I'd never missed a game, and I didn't want to start then. So I didn't want to have to ask somebody if I could go watch my son's soccer game. So with the blessing of my boss, I left the firm that I was with, and I started the Tyra Law Firm. Again, initially doing personal injury law. At the time, I knew I wanted to add some other practice areas, so I added family law because I was a glutton for punishment, and then I did that for a while till both my kids were grown. My daughter's an actress in Hollywood. My son's now a mathematician and a teacher in San Diego. Both of them live on the West Coast. So I wanted to decouple myself from the courthouse. And so for that reason, again, I transitioned one more time, which is like starting a whole new career. And I started doing estate planning, which I do largely from my home office here, although I do have a physical space in town. And that's where I'm at now. At the same
Awesome.
time, I've met Maddy as a result of, I also started several years ago, a podcast. I was a podcast junkie, and I initially started the podcast, quite frankly, to get free advice. I figured if I interviewed some successful, smart people for 3 to 6 months, I would, maybe some of it would rub off, and I'd get smarter. And what I didn't realize is that there was a tremendous need for that in the legal community, because they don't teach you about running a business in law school. They teach you about law, but not how to run a business. And the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was I had a classmate of mine, young kid. Of course, everybody was younger than me because I was the oldest person in the class. Sadly, lost their license because they failed to manage their escrow account properly. And when I spoke to them about it, they said, well, they'd never even owned a checking account until they opened their own practice. And so at that point, I realized that the law schools had done a terrible job of educating their students with respect to the real world. And that's why I started the podcast. It's been 4 years later, almost 250 episodes. We're still going strong. And I get to talk to great people like Maddy and others, and hopefully share some of the things I've learned along the way. And that's what we're going to try and do today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love hearing your story, Neil, every time. I learn, something else about you. And, in the topic today, we're going to be talking about, and it is a mouthful, the entrepreneurial architecture of the modern law firm. And I sort of laughed as I was putting the little email invitations together, like, oh, every book in the, world says, don't write something like that in an email subject line, but screw it, right? That's what this is about. And we want to be direct, and we're not going to, sugarcoat it or sound like, we're talking to fifth graders. We're talking to attorneys and business owners and people who are serious professionals who understand and sign up for a course like this on the entrepreneurial architecture, because they know what that's going to be about. They know it's going to be about the pillars and the finances and the foundation that you're building when you're building a business. And who better to learn it from than someone who has as diverse experience as you do. I think that's really sort of a rich opportunity for everyone who's in the Smith.ai community that's here with us today. So let's talk about, we've already gotten a little bit of an introduction, but I'd like to talk about specifically right now as people are looking at, we'll look at their finances, we'll look at practice management software, we'll talk about virtual receptionists and support and assistance, the infrastructure itself, but what are the pillars that we're going to focus on today that frame out the structure when we talk about an entrepreneur's architecture of the modern firm or modern practice or business?
Well, first thing, I think one of the things that gives me a little credence in this area is that I've literally made every mistake you can make. So, if you could screw it up, I have done so. So it's probably a whole education just to learn from my mistakes. I was successful in running my martial arts studio, but not initially. Initially, I lost a lot of money and really worried about whether or not I would make a go of it. So I made a lot of mistakes, not the least of which was spending nearly $20,000 building out a space and adding a really beautiful floor in the studio that I had no students. So had I thought about it and had I had somebody to help advise me at the time, they would have said, hey, spend your 20,000 elsewhere.
Get the
Uh,
students, right.
get the students, right.
Have them cram a space and have to get a bigger space.
Right, exactly. So, and then when and I come from largely from a tech background, because when I had 20 years building hardware and software systems, I managed a large scale software development team, 70 programmers building air defense software. So that was more in the management and the tech arena. So when I started my business, my law firm business, those are the things that I brought to the table: a strong tech background
Right.
and a lot of mistakes. So at the time, there wasn't a lot of information available about how do you start a business in the legal practice. So there are a couple of books which are since been that are pretty outdated, uh, and so really I had to again kind of learn from my mistakes. And I thought, well, it's going to be great because I've already made all the mistakes that I could possibly make in running a business. And little did I realize that no, there's a whole new set of mistakes to make.
There's a whole new world of mistakes waiting
There's a
for
whole
you.
new,
Stumble on them, right?
yeah,
Exactly. So so obviously tech plays a big role,
yep,
and that's really top of mind for people right now, because here we are, we're recording this still during COVID. There's sort of a second wave that we're seeing, and we all held our breath, and now take a deep breath because you're going to hold it even longer, right?
yeah,
So tech has considerable benefits when you think about efficiency, productivity, scaling out and competing as a smaller firm in a larger market. When we think about tech, number one, people think about practice management solutions, right? I mean, that's easily where your mind goes to in the top two tech systems that people implement in law firms first and foremost. Probably also calendaring solutions, online payments, that would absolutely be considered tech. Not to mention your website and marketing distribution channels, right? But just for practice management alone, you mentioned when we were planning this that you think it could even be considered malpractice not to have a practice management solution. And for everyone who's not in a law firm, basically that is a, project management meets CRM for lawyers for managing cases and clients.
yeah. Well, first off, I'm sensitive to the fact that we don't have all attorneys here. And so when I talk about the 5 pillars of the entrepreneurial uh, law firm, it really applies to any business in today's world.
Mm-hmm.
And practice management, has a specific meaning to attorneys, but as you very accurately stated, it's really project management / CRM, customer relationship management. You combine those two concepts together, and that's what we commonly refer to as practice management. So if you're running a chiropractor's office, or you're running, a barbershop, or any type of small business, you need to have that kind of help in terms of managing the information that drives your business. Because even if you're a service provider and you're trading or performing some type of function, there's underlying data issues that drive your business. Who are your clients? Where do they live? How do they pay you? How do you communicate with them? That's all data driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to have some kind of system along those lines. Now, and I have technology listed as kind of the 5th pillar here, because it's easy for me to get bogged down talking about that first, because I'm a tech nerd. That's what I want to do. And practice
I wanted to
management.
make sure that we didn't run out of time, Neil.
Uh,
I have
we'll,
a strategy here.
we'll kind of work this in that regard. So when we talk about technology, I think you've got to take the 50,000 foot view of this. And really, the question you need to ask yourself is, how comfortable am I with technology? And how do I want it to work for me? So it's easy to get bogged down into choosing specific technological solutions, but you really have to come to grips with, how is it that you use technology? So it would be impractical for you if you have difficulty using a laptop to write a document in Microsoft Word. If that presents a challenge to you, to then say you're going to run your business entirely using technology resources is maybe a bit of a stretch. So you need to come to grips with specifically how you relate to technology. In the legal world, we have a requirement to be minimally compliant with technology, and it's part of our professional responsibility. That may not be true in other business areas, but to be a successful business person, you have to be at least minimally compliant. And so you have to know where your weak spots are. And if you can't fill them, you need to be able to figure out how to go out about and get those addressed.
One thing I'll mention here, Neil, because you just brought it up, your profession might not have the same guidelines and rules as lawyers do, but you can actually take sort of a card from the lawyer playbook and say, it's actually a huge benefit to have these things written out so clearly. And if you're not seeing them as rules of playing the game and your profession doesn't lay it out as clearly, you can do so for yourself and look at what's being done in finance and medical and legal, even in IT. Increasingly, people have disclaimers on their websites to say, oh, you're getting advice from us, but we're not your dedicated IT provider. It's the same thing as, working with a lawyer. You think, okay, there's a level of responsibility here. And what is it? It could be ethical, it could be technological, it could be financial. But actually, if you're not in the legal profession, very interesting to look at the professional rules of conduct from the bar associations and say, what does this mean for my profession? Just as an aside.
Yeah, and then, once you come to grips with all of that, then I think you can start getting a more granular look at the technology suite that you feel comfortable with. Mm-hmm. I know for me, I made a decision early in the game as to what ecosystem I wanted to operate in, and I'm a big Apple fanboy, so I knew I wanted to be in the Apple ecosphere the entire time. But other people, they may not be as adamant about that. And in fact, these days, really, it's all become a moot point because darn near virtually everything is cloud-based. So if you start with that,
Omni operating system, like
right.
most tools are going to operate. Look, we just had a webinar with Text Expander the other day that used to be Mac only.
Right.
Now it's for PC users too.
Yeah, and so that makes the decision a little easier in that regard. So when we talk about technology, I normally start with your website. And again, look, you can spend an awful lot of money. I wasted so much money building out my website for my law firm because I thought other people had better solutions. I looked at other law firms and said, oh, who did their website? I like that. And then entered into a contract which was really not good for me. Mm-hmm. So you really have to explore those options really well.
Let's dig into that for a second, Neil, because I think there are a lot of people who are like, what do I need to be on the lookout for? Like what danger might be ahead of me or that I'm in that I don't even know I'm in? What are the things to really look out for websites, and what are the myths that you want to debunk?
Well, first off, you need to make sure that you own the website. So many times when you hire a web developer, mainly the larger companies that do these, in the fine print of the contract, you'll find that they really own the website and that you may own the URL, the address, but the whole content that they've developed on your behalf, they still retain rights to. So that's kind of like
shocking, actually, and very bad if that's the case.
Yeah, and it happens all the time. When I went to break my contract with the company that was doing my website, they said, fine, well, just take it down. And we went, wait, don't take it down. We need to transfer it over to my new provider. That no, we don't do that. Check your contract. So, I mean, that was a real eye opener for me, and kind of embarrassingly so, because as an attorney, you'd think that I'd have read that part of the fine print. But however, we learned those lessons the hard way. Another thing to look out for, if you have, a lot of times the web development companies will say, okay, well, to make it easier, we need to host your website on our servers. So you buy your URL and then you host it on their server so that they can maintain the website. Well, when it comes time to leave, frequently you find out that your Google Analytics account or your Facebook ads account or a bunch of other things that tie in with your website, because your website was hosted on their server, if you take the website back, you find out the hard way that all that data doesn't transfer with
all
you.
the images that are embedded,
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All that data.
Yeah. Now, I ended up at multiple different times, quote, rolling my own website, creating my own website. So I would maintain control of it using a couple of different platforms. Squarespace is one, Wix is another, and they're very, very good. You can do some great things with them, but you can spend an awful lot of time doing that. And if that's not your bailiwick, if that's not something you want to do, that's an area where you can waste an awful lot of time. I think the big, the 600-pound gorilla in the room in terms of websites is WordPress. So WordPress is a platform that you can build websites upon. Is open source, which means it's not owned by a particular company. And you can find a lot of developers who are very WordPress savvy. So if you were thinking about hiring somebody to do your website, I would make sure you host it on your own provider, and that you hire a contractor, whether they be virtual or in-house or what have you, that develops it in WordPress so that you can easily change themes or rehost it somewhere else. As long as it's WordPress compliant, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also what you're comfortable with. When we talked about practice management systems, for example, or project management, there is the Kanban style, vertical style of project management. You move from one bucket to the other, right? Something is in definition, it's ready for the team, it's in progress, it's ready for review, it's done. If you haven't sort of heard of Kanban before, you can look it up or email me, and I'd be happy to share more information with you. But it's also about what makes sense to you. Are you a visual learner? Do you see things and it needs to flow left to right, right? Or is it top down? What makes the most sense for you? Clubhouse, for example, Asana, you've heard of these project management solutions. You've heard of all of the, practice management or even CRMs, right? Is it Salesforce or HubSpot or Clio, you name it? It's really coming down to what you're going to use. So what website, what software actually works for you and feels the most intuitive, and what allows you the opportunity to grow into it as your skills and needs change. So you don't have to make those really clunky switches from one website to another, which Neil, you know as well as I do, it's not fun, and it burns time that you would rather spend on other, more business building work rather than consuming time just doing a switch that doesn't really create much growth.
And
Solve the problem.
And if people were actually want to be even more forward-looking, I'm going to suggest that the idea of a website is beginning to diminish for a lot of small firms and small businesses, and instead a collection of landing pages that interconnect with a email service provider or a auto mailer, if you will, tend to be more robust, more easily constructed, more direct, they're more action oriented. And the really forward thinking entrepreneurs are ditching the website, or if not abandoning it altogether, making it a fairly perfunctory, static type place where they store maybe their blog posts or their resume or what have you. But instead, the dynamic part of their online presence and their lead capturing system is using a platform that provides landing pages.
Mm-hmm.
So, a number of email providers such as MailChimp or Aweber, Constant Contact, they all have built-in landing page development capabilities and integrate natively with their auto mailer functions.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, you get people to come to that landing page. That's why it's called a landing page. And all the information that you're trying to convey there to get them to make a purchasing decision, or at least start them along that path, is on that page. And then in exchange for providing their email address to you for some item of value, then they're added to an automatic emailing system, such as I said, MailChimp or Aweber, what have you. And that is where most entrepreneurs are going from a technology standpoint these days.
Right, capture the information, and then the work is in nurturing and follow up and exposure, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it used to be the case that you needed, 7 points of exposure until someone would buy from you, and now it's in the 20s. So people are being inundated with information, and if you have their email, not only can, by the way, you send them messages, but if they visit a website of yours, you can capture sort of them online with cookies and pixels and show them your content no matter where they are, even if they don't respond to email. So that's on Facebook, that's around the web, showing them advertisements and other messaging. Now, speaking of sort of your pillars, moving to another one is, well, I don't know if this is the pillar of yours, but it's the office, right? And now that people are moving more towards remote work, how has that changed your perception of like that brick and mortar pillar? Is that still really necessary for attorneys to have offices? I think this is something that all business owners are toying with, other than sort of the restaurants or the gyms, maybe as a better example.
Yeah, I think more and more that is going to be the legacy of the pandemic, is that more and more businesses are moving forevermore into the virtual space. So I knew I always wanted to be virtual when I started my practice, but for me that really meant mobile at the time, not necessarily virtual. And so I had a brick and mortar office space. Again, you can spend an awful lot of time, money, and effort to get brick and mortar office space. Now, one of the good things about that right now is because so many people are leaving those type spaces, they're very cost effective to acquire. I mean, I had a friend of mine closed her small office and got an entire floor on another building because they're hurting for tenants. So if you know you need a brick and mortar facility, then fine. This might be a good time to do that because there's a lot of opportunity there. But if not, then I think you're going to be looking either at a hybrid or else totally virtual.
I will say also, one of the things that I always encourage is before you need it, try it and test it, right? So if maybe there is a future that's coming where the client really begs and asks for a Zoom meeting, you better be prepared to have a really effective client consultation and know how to sell on video and not face-to-face. Get really super comfortable with it before it's demanded of you. I think that's one of the areas where all of a sudden practice management was here, all of a sudden solution, all of a sudden calendaring was here, all of a sudden, websites, right? And the people who do best with these tools are not the ones who went and got a computer science degree necessarily, But those who dive in and try it and allow for failure early on before the spotlight is on that particular area and say, oh, I've been testing this. I've been trying Zoom calls. I've been, trying out Calendly or Acuity. And I'm quite familiar with what those tools can do for me. And I know that when my client base comes, to demand them, I know exactly what I'll use, right? And I hear so often on like Facebook groups, my conversion rate is lower on Zoom. I need my physical office. And so often that is because you are yourself not super comfortable and at your best selling capacity, because that medium is new to you. So get comfortable with it and the business will typically follow.
Yeah, I had a conversation with an attorney not too long ago, and they were bemoaning the fact that they were having to do Zoom conferences and they weren't comfortable with them, and they didn't feel like they were being effective with their potential clients. And I asked them, I said, well, how much preparation did you do? Did you practice doing Zoom calls with your family and with friends? And they went, oh no, that might have been a good idea. Yeah, why would you want to experiment on potential clients?
And you betray your expertise, right? I mean, you
Exactly.
probably have such a brilliant presence in person where you're in your element and you're comfortable and you've done that 1,000 times. But, if you get thrown onto a Zoom call, you're not going to be your most articulate, clear-headed self, right? So stack the deck in your favor as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think we're going to have lots of attorneys and lots of businesses that are 100% virtual, run from the office in your house, so to speak. On the other hand, I think the hybrid approach is going to be even more prevalent, where people, such as myself, this is exactly what I do. I have a shared office space with Regis, which is it's an international shared office company like WeWork, and I pay a monthly fee to be able to use that office up to 5 times during the month. So what I will typically do, this was pre-pandemic, is if I have a lot of client meetings, I will batch them up on 5 specific days and then use an office for that. Otherwise, I work from my office here at home, or else I can work at the Starbucks, at the Panera, wherever I have a Wi-Fi connection. And so I think you need to kind of explore those options. They're more and more available. Now your geographic location may not be as complete in that sense, may not have that many opportunities, but there's all kinds of office space that you can rent on a part-time basis. And so I would start there. And then if you find that you can afford it and your work warrants it, and you want a full-time brick and mortar space, well, then you can step up to that. But don't lock yourself into that ahead of time. Now, I will tell you, my clients have told me that they prefer virtual.
And what is the reasoning there that they
Well,
are?
it's interesting because I was having difficulty getting potential clients to come in, and I did a survey. And what is your biggest concern? And the number one concern was coming to your office. Like, gee, why is that? Well, because we work. I'd have to take time off from work.
So let's preface this with, this was before COVID, right?
This is before COVID, yes.
Hesitation to come to your office because it's way more time consuming.
There's way more time consuming. So, okay, well then I said, my response, well, how about if I come to you? As a estate planner, I can come meet you at your, at your home, and well, no. Then I have to clean the house, and I got to
too intimate.
Yeah, I got to figure out something to do.
Another inconvenience.
Another inconvenience.
Right.
And so I said, well, how about, if we're going to meet at the Starbucks? Oh man, same thing. I gotta, make time, and both of us can't come at the same time. What would be the best solution? How about if we did this virtual online, where we use at that time FaceTime and or Skype? Now it's kind of morphed to Zoom. and online, forms and
Mhm.
what have you. By far and away, my clients have said that is what they prefer. They prefer interacting with their attorney via the computer. And so, to me, I think that we're going to see even more and more of that.
And I think even, especially estate practices, it's often said that those are the sort of slowest to move, but in your case, they were pushing you to move faster. So I think
Absolutely.
that's really important to highlight there, that there are often claims of your demographic, of your clients, slowing down your sort of tech progress of your practice. And that's really not necessarily the case. In fact, I think
Because
my
I've heard
spends
many
more
times
time on
people
Facebook than I do.
I've heard many times people say, well, my customer base, my
Mhm.
client base is older.
Mhm.
They're not gonna do,
Right.
they're
I
not gonna
hear that
want to do
often.
Zoom. And I said, how many grandparents do you know that are FaceTiming their grandkids?
Pretty much all of them.
All of them.
Yep.
Okay? They may
Because
not
they
be,
have to. Where
they have
there's
to.
a will, there's a way.
Yeah, they may not be able to make a spreadsheet sing, but they know how to place a FaceTime or a Zoom call.
Right.
So I think that's something we have to come to grip with as entrepreneurial.
I completely agree with you. And then just stemming from, our discussion of the virtual office, we have talked a lot about the virtual assistant,
Yep.
virtual paralegal, virtual receptionist. How has that played a role in your practice and its growth?
Well, I think, just as I've made the comment, not having a practice management system, I think, is tantamount to legal malpractice. Another truism is that, and I have to admit, I borrowed this from a friend of ours who you may know, who has said that the most cost-effective way to scale your business is through hiring virtual assistants. And the first thing that most attorneys go to, the first thought that they have is, I don't have enough work for a virtual assistant, because they're thinking
Mhm.
full-time virtual assistant.
Right.
Okay. But you can hire virtual assistants on an hourly basis
Or on demand,
or
as
on
the phone
demand. Yeah.
rings. Right.
And so there's lots of different platforms. Upwork is probably one of the most well known, and Fiverr is another one that's very well known. And so you can hire virtual assistants to do anything you don't like to do at a fraction of the cost. And many of them are offshore. They're in foreign countries, but they speak, very good English. They communicate really well. Would you put them in front of a client or a customer? Maybe not. But to do all that other stuff that you don't like to do, you can hire a virtual assistant. Uh, and I had another mentor that said, if you don't know what to hire them for, sit at your desk and start tapping your pencil until you come up with an idea.
Or
Because
ask them.
or ask them, because if you went and hired a virtual assistant, let's just say you hired one and you planned on um, hiring them for 5 hours a week,
Mhm.
right? You get them as cheap as $5 an hour. Okay, and that's good money from where they work. If you
Mhm.
had somebody 5 hours a week, start asking yourself, what could they do for me? What is it that I don't like to do? What is it that I'm spending too much time, given what I'm capable of doing? What am I spending too much time doing? Start and give it to your virtual assistant. They don't get it right. It's probably because you're not doing a good job showing them what you want to do. So
Mhm.
learn the skill of how to delegate and how to engage these assistants, and then just start offloading work and keep hiring virtual assistants, keep loading them down with stuff to do until you're sitting on the beach just monitoring the work of your virtual assistants.
And even getting to the point where, if you have a virtual paralegal or an assistant or writer, blog writer, very often, getting it to even 80% to where you put your twist on it or you review it and then you polish it, still hugely beneficial.
It
So
is.
it doesn't have to be everything. It should be someone who you are comfortable with. Obviously, there's confidentiality that you need to be mindful of. But if you are also training, people who are working for you virtually, I highly recommend using, Loom for
Right.
recording videos. Document your training, because the most frustrating thing for many small business owners, including lawyers, is I keep training them on the same thing. And if you record a video once, then instructing them to watch the video instead of bothering you, A, is relief for you, and B, is a great test of whether or not they're going to make it in the long run, because they should have everything that they need.
Yeah. I've even gone so far as hire virtual assistants to help keep the virtual assistant training program up to date. Yeah.
Absolutely. Can you document all of this? Or we're going to have a call and record it, and you're going to make it into a help document, right? To guide
And
the
there
rest
are
of the team.
varying levels of virtual assistant too. So as we said, you can get them on an hourly basis or an on-demand basis to do one-off projects, what have you. Then there are things like a virtual receptionist.
Mm-hmm.
If you spend a lot of time doing intake on the phone, then that may not be the best use of your time. So you can hire a virtual receptionist such as Smith.ai, and you can offload that function for far cheaper than if you were to hire somebody full time as your receptionist. So
Right.
I kept offloading those kinds of tasks. First, I hired a virtual receptionist. Then I hired a virtual bookkeeper.
Mm-hmm.
Then I hired my first VA to do some graphic design work for me, and it just kept multiplying from there.
And your comfort does build over time, right? I mean, it's not
And
something that
eventually,
you can
you can
expect to
even
be comfortable
hire,
with.
in the legal space, you can eventually hire legal assistants, virtual paralegals, virtual legal assistants, and even virtual attorneys. So
Right.
you can have your entire office staffed by people who work for you virtually and that you may never see physically.
And who are focused on, the best things that they like doing. So their work satisfaction is so much higher and the retention is so much higher. I know many firms and businesses that have a paralegal or a specialist or a technician of some kind who's really specialized, and they're answering the phone or they're answering emails, and they don't need to do that. And their time is more valuable than that, just as you would prize your own time. I think another point that you touched on earlier that I want to directly address is that you may not have a fantastic job market in your area. And one of the benefits of going virtual, not just yourself, but in the entire mindset, is having the access to hire someone, or giving yourself the permission to hire remote staff who may be dedicated to you. They may even be employees, right? They don't have to be just part-time contractors like the ones that we're talking about, or services. But if you go outside of your job market, if you're in a rural area, you can tap into, a better pool of talent potentially. If you're in an urban area, you can tap into a wider pool of talent who might be more affordable because there's less competition. There
For
might
sure.
be someone who's really great in the suburbs that wouldn't come in to your city office. So that is a competitive advantage for any small business. Now, speaking of finances, as we don't have a ton of time left, I want to make sure that we touch on this. Managing finances is so critical to the success. We talked in the beginning about the story of the lawyer who basically lost her practice because of mismanagement of finances. Yeah. How do you really get things tidy, and how much work is involved? Like, what tools do you need in order to do this just reasonably well and securely?
Well, first off, I think that one of the first hires that an attorney needs to make, and probably any business owner needs to make, is a bookkeeper. Somebody to make sure that your records are correct. Now, most businesses these days use electronic bookkeeping, whether it be electronic checking accounts, maintaining their banking accounts on the bank's system, and then integrating those with an accounting package such as QuickBooks or Mint are a couple of examples. So you want to do the accounting work. So you want to record everything. For an attorney, it requires you have two accounts. You're an operating account and an escrow account. You need to learn how to manage the money in an escrow account that's compliant with your bar requirements. But the the bookkeeping function is really kind of a backwards looking financial management. Looks at what have you done. Let's put everything in the right slots. Tag it appropriately as an expense or income, and what type of expense and what type of income, so that we can generate profit loss statements and the like. What I think the next step has to be is a financial assistant, whether it be a manager or administrator or planner, that has you then start looking forward. What are my needs going forward? What should my budget be going forward? What are my expectations in terms of income going forward? And help me make some decisions, like what could be deductible? What advantages could I get from using, say, credit cards, which are a realistic approach to business financing. But you want to make sure you get something from the use of those credit cards, like points or cash back or the like. So first hire the accounting virtual accountant, bookkeeper to look put things in shape looking backwards. Then hire the planner to help you look forward. And if you're again, for an attorney, one of the kind of not new but emerging kind of philosophies is the profit first model, which involves taking your salary out of the mix first and managing your business on the remainder, as opposed to the other way around, which is normally how we do things. And then finally, the last part of that would be you need somebody to help you, assuming that you're banking some money, you're putting some money in the bank from your business. Let's hope you are. You need a financial planner to help provide for your long-term security. Don't try and do that on your own.
So I think that, we're getting into something really interesting right now to tie all of this up, focusing on the very first word of this topic, which was the entrepreneur's architecture, right? So entrepreneurial architecture, an entrepreneur is someone who's starting something, a business, but also, there is this business goal of having a thriving, profitable business. And, how much do you grow it? What size business do you want? How does that meet your lifestyle and career goals? One of the things that we often see is, okay, I've expanded and I have as much work as I can handle. Do I hire another attorney? Traditionally we would say, are you going to open another office? But that might not be as much of a conversation anymore if we're moving away from physical offices. How are you tying that sort of front end that we talked about, the website, marketing, and the conversion rate, and those goals aligned with your revenue there, with the actual infrastructure to serve that client base that you're attracting? There's sort of this input cost, and then there's a responsive cost to make sure that you have the business that is the size that you need to deliver effective services to your client base that you're attracting. How do you manage and sort of anticipate those costs and get to that next stage of growth?
Well, I think it involves a fundamental paradigm shift. And we've probably all heard this before, but it is so valid. You have to stop working in your business and start working on your business. So if you're the one who's providing the billable work, whether it's doesn't matter what your business is, if you're the one doing the work versus you're the one managing the people who do the work, I think that's the fundamental shift. And it's really hard for attorneys to give up. It's also hard for artists to give up. So you have to make that fundamental shift so that you can now take that top-down view and say, what are the pillars? What is holding up this business? What is working well? What's not working well? And then the fundamental question is not, how can I fix this? But rather, who can I get to fix this?
Mm-hmm.
Not how do I improve this, but who do I get that will improve this? And if that's where your thinking is, I think you have a chance of being successful.
And you end up having such a relief when the burden is not on you to fix all of those problems, but to be a problem solver and select the right person to do that task, or the right agency, to do that task. You don't need to learn how to make your own website. You need to know how to discern who's going to create, your new website for you. Are you good at picking those service providers and contractors? And the only way to do that is to try and to learn and get exposure to what that process is like. As we sort of wrap up here, I want to share with everyone today that if you would like to learn more about, Smith.ai, virtual receptionist, website chat to support your delegation and your outsourcing and your growth, we would love to give you a free 20 call, 20 chat trial. You can use the code Law Entrepreneur, which is what we'll use to tag you to Neil and say, thank you for joining us today. And that's good for 14 days. And then after that, we have month-to-month plans. So what we've talked about here today is flexibility and control in your business, in your growth. It keeps you in tune to not have an annual subscription to something. You're evaluating regularly. You're keeping a close eye on your finances, and you have solutions that can flex as your needs change, or as we have a COVID pandemic, et cetera. It's nice to be able to have flexibility in your business and not be tethered to certain software or services or whatever it is. So give us a try. We'd love to show you what we can do, not just answering calls, but also screening and intake and scheduling, you name it. And then if you would like to hear more from Neil and listen to his fantastic podcast, I think you've got a Facebook group too. Neil, how can they stay in touch with you?
Well, the best way is to go to the website, thelawentrepreneur.com. Hardest job is being able to spell entrepreneur, but thelawentrepreneur.com is where you can find us. On any of the podcast platforms, iTunes, which is it's not iTunes anymore, it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google. You can search for our podcast there. They can email me at Neil, Neil, at thelawentrepreneur.com. And Maddy, just let me also just say, even though, as you well know, I use a competitor of yours for my virtual receptionist, I know a ton of people who use Smith.ai, and honest to God, I've not heard one of them say a bad thing about Smith.ai, not one.
Thanks, Neil.
So it's a great company. You're at all considering using a virtual receptionist, you can do no better than Smith.ai. And that, I've got no dog in this fight, but honestly, from me to you, I don't know anybody who's not had a good experience with your company.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. And thanks for all the praise in the chat. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, please do email Neil. I provided his email to you. I will also provide it to you in the follow-up and in the summary of the video, which I'll provide an upload to YouTube. But Neil, thank you so much for joining us today. Really fascinating to get to know your pillars of a modern law practice and to apply it to other businesses as well. So thanks for sharing an hour with us, and really looking forward to another conversation with you soon.
My pleasure.
Take care.